10 books that I recommend if you want to start reading classics. First one is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I think that this is one of the easiest books that you could start if you want to read a classic, if you want to start your classic journey. I think that it's not a difficult book to read because the story is very simple, and I think that even though you think you don't know the story, most of us know the story. Maybe we saw a movie or maybe the story sounds similar. It's a very beautiful book. The writing style is not very difficult. Of course, I read the translation, but I found it pretty easy, and I was 16 or 15, maybe 16 when I read it, and I loved it. I think this is a 4 stars out of 5 for me, and I recommend you start with it as well. Next one is My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. Daphne, as you know, is my favorite author, and this is one of the first classic books that I read. I know it's not really considered a classic, but I do consider it a classic, and it's very easy. If you've read Daphne, you know that she doesn't have a difficult way of writing, and when you read her books, it's like you read a nowadays thriller. It's like you read maybe Paula Hawkins, something like that. She is a very good writer. The story flows. It's an amazing story, and I remember that I didn't know anything about the story. This was a present from my mother, and I didn't know what to read next. I didn't have many books back then, and I chose this one. I couldn't put it down. It's as simple as that. Next one is Rebecca by the same author. As you know, this is my all-time favorite book, and I did a separate review on it if you want to watch it. But I think that this book has everything in it. It has power, it has rage, it has very difficult and complicated characters, it has a beautiful, beautiful writing style, it has the thriller in it, it has villains which you don't expect to be, and this is one of the first classic books that I recommend you start with. Next one is The Count of Monte Cristo. This might surprise you because it's a huge book, and to be honest with you, I didn't finish it either, but not because it was too difficult or because I didn't like it, but because the first edition that I got when I was also 16, that's when I started reading it. It was a very short edition, and I didn't know that back then. I went to an antique bookstore and I said, I want this book. The man from there gave me the book, but he didn't tell me that this is a very short edition. I think it had like 400 pages or 500, and the total is 1,000 pages, 500 long book. It's very easy to go through it, especially if you go through the first, let's say 100, 150 pages, then the action will just flow for you. I think that the subject of it, of trying to escape a prison and revenge, I think that this is one of the maybe only books written at that time about revenge and accepted in such a way that I think that even for today's world, this is a very good book to read and find yourself in one or maybe more characters. I think that you shouldn't be scared about how big you see it is, and I think that you should concentrate on the story itself because it's a beautiful story, and I was mesmerized when I found out that this book is so old. So if you haven't given it a shot, please do. You will not be disappointed. Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre is also a big book, and Charlotte Bronte is one of the 3 sisters who wrote books. We have Charlotte Bronte, we have Emily Bronte, who wrote Wuthering Heights, and we have Anne Bronte, who wrote one of the many books, Agnes Grey. I think that Jane Eyre is a very good decision to start with because it's not a difficult book to read. When you read it, you feel like you cannot put it down, even though the first maybe 100 pages are not that interesting, but they give a background on the childhood of the heroine because you need to understand what she had to go through to get to where she's at right now. It's very similar to Rebecca in a way when we see this story, and if you read Rebecca and then you read Jane Eyre, or if you read both, you will know what I'm talking about. I don't want to give spoilers, so try to think about a book that's been written so many years ago, 200 and something years ago, that has some thriller genre in it, some thriller parts, and then a very big reveal, a huge reveal at the end that you would never expect. I think that even though I was 16 when I read this one, I appreciated it a lot. I understood everything from it. The writing style was pretty easy to follow. There weren't many difficult words that I had to search, and I liked it a lot. I think it took me less than 3 weeks to finish it, which for the almost 600 pages that this book has, I think that's a good timing. Dracula, yes, it's also a classic, and it's one of my favorite books. Not because I'm from the country that the action takes place, but because I always loved the story. I remember I was 6 years old when I first watched the movie Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1992, and I was very scared, but I also liked the story and the actors a lot. It's not a long book. I think it has 400 pages, and the writing style is not difficult to follow. First of all, it's not a difficult book, but you need to take your time when you read this book. You need to take your time and dive in and understand it and appreciate it. I think everyone knows the story of Dracula, but this one is the closest and the best written one. And if you want to watch a movie, watch the one from 1992. It's the closest to the book. Fun fact about Bram Stoker is that he never went to Romania, and everything he knew was from other books, and he had as main inspiration Carmilla. Carmilla is a novella. I also read it, and you can see that it's been written some years before, because this for me was a 5 out of 5 stars, and Carmilla was a 2 or 3 stars out of 5. Getting back to this book, I think that the way he portrays the characters, the way he portrays Count Dracula is mesmerizing. I was mesmerized the whole book. I could not put it down, even though I remember that I was traveling a lot at the time I was reading this, and it took me maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks to finish it. I was also 16 years old. I read a lot in 2016, and this one was one of my favorites from the year, and it still is to this day one of my favorites ever classics. So it's not difficult to read. I think that you can easily start with this one if you want to start your journey into the classic world, and I'm definitely sure that if you're not gonna love it, you're gonna appreciate it a lot. Therese Raquin. Émile Zola is an interesting author. This is the only book I read from him, and it will not be the last. I was 17 when I read this one, and what convinced me to get this book and to read it, as you can see, this edition is very old. It's from the 70s, but it's in a pretty good condition. And sometimes I like to just read old editions, especially because the words are older and poshier, and I get to learn words that were used 50, 70, 80 years ago. This book is a bit different from the others that I presented you until now. This book is about unaliving someone as a couple and then having to live with that on your shoulders. To me, it was an interesting take on the subject, and I read it in 3 or 4 days, so it's not very long. It's a 300 pages book, but for a classic, 3-4 days was at the time, and still is to this time, a very good time for me. And what I loved about it was that it was very easy to go through it. It didn't feel like Crime and Punishment. Crime and Punishment, I wasn't able to finish it to this day. Dostoevsky is, to me, a difficult classic to read, so I wouldn't recommend going into Dostoevsky as, your first classic book. Therese Raquin was a 3 or 4 stars out of 5 for me, and I would go back to this author anytime. Last one, and this might surprise you, is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. I read this book when I was 17, and I read it after I read Madame Bovary by Flaubert. Madame Bovary I didn't like. It was difficult for me, it was difficult to follow, and it was difficult to understand the main character. However, Anna Karenina was and still is one of my favorite books. Even though it's very long, I also read it in around 2 weeks. I think it has almost 900 pages, at least this edition. I know that there are editions who have 1,000 pages or maybe 500 pages, but it's a big book. And usually when you hear about Leo Tolstoy, you think he's a difficult author. Why would you recommend me start with this one? I left it last for a reason. I wouldn't recommend you to go first into reading this one, but I don't think that it's a difficult book. I think that anyone who has read at least 3 or 4 other classics and other authors wouldn't have any issues finishing this book. This is not a difficult book, and I loved the comparison that I did in my mind between Anna Karenina and Emma Bovary. There were a lot of movies and TV series done after this book, and I wouldn't be able to recommend you one that would fit the book the best, because I don't think I adored one especially. I know that the closest one to how I imagined Anna was the one from 2012 with Keira Knightley, and when I say that is because I imagined Anna to be very similar to someone who looks like Keira. The 2012 version is very theatrical. I mean, the whole point of it is to be theater on screen, even though it doesn't seem to be at all times, but I liked it very much and I could not put it down. And I also remember I did a project at school where I did a comparison between Anna Karenina and Emma Bovary. If you know, you know why, because they both end pretty much the same or similarly, even though there are different reasons for which the main characters get to that decision. And my colleagues didn't read a lot, and everyone was paying attention. It was a PowerPoint presentation, but everyone paid attention, and I was so proud of myself that I made them be interested in 2 books that are usually considered boring and difficult. I mean, I consider Madame Bovary difficult, but I didn't consider this one difficult. So I would recommend you read this one. And I wouldn't be able to compare it to War and Peace. I know that War and Peace is much bigger. I haven't read it. I'm a bit scared, but I think Leo had some real talent, and to me he is still one of the best authors to have lived and one of the most talented authors that lived. So let me know, which one did you read and what do you think about my recommendations? Do you think these books should be as a starter for classic books or not? Please like, subscribe, and comment on this video for more content.